Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. It is great to have you along with us. As our audience knows, I was Chief Executive Officer of two manufacturing companies, Chief Operating Officer of a third one during a 25-year career in advanced manufacturing. And I can tell you this, when we hired people, and it didn't matter if it was people coming into us with almost no skills, or if it was somebody that was all the way up the food chain, what was important to me more than anything is what was that person able to do when we received them into our organization. Degrees were fine, certifications even better, but at the end of the day, what's really, really important is what can a person do, where can they add value, and how can they help my organization? As we were warming up for this discussion, today's guest was telling me all about his commitment to competency-based education, doing it in a really, really creative way, building incredible partnerships at the government level, the public policy level, especially at the industry level. We're going to talk about all of these topics today with Dr. Doug Jensen. Dr. Jensen is the president of Bismarck State College in Bismarck, North Dakota. And Dr. Jensen, if it's okay, I'm going to call you Doug, and welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here today, especially with you and your audience.
I know that so much of who you are, Doug, has been formed by your upbringing. You have just an incredible background and some challenges that you overcame over the course of your life. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to have you share that with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate that very much because it has shaped who I am, and it's shaped, my values and my goals and how I look at the world. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right outside Pittsburgh. I'm in Mon Valley. A lot of people know the steel community. My father was a machinist. He passed away when I was 12 years old. And one of the things I remember, I used to walk down the railroad tracks as he was walking home from the mill. And as a machinist, he'd always have a piece of metal he would bring me home every night when I was like, 9 years of age or 8 years of age. And I'd walk down there and he would take out a piece of whatever he was working on and he would hand it to me. And as we were walking, he would talk to me about angles and this and that. And it just really shaped my idea about how does all this stuff come together, making things. So my mother passed away when I was 19. I found myself in a very difficult situation because at that time in the greater Pittsburgh area, the steel mills were collapsing. And once the steel mills go down, basically all the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers disappear. We went from like 80% home ownership in the community I was in to about 80% rentals. And I found myself facing a very difficult situation where I was not prepared for life after school. My goal was to get out, go to work for US Steel, and have a great quality of life like so many people. Ran into a former high school teacher, and she told me about this program because she knew I was struggling. And she said, "Why don't you come up to the local community college? We have a dislocated workers program for you." And I'm like, "Miss Fletcher, that's not for me. You know me. You know my family. You know who I was. My family did not go to college. I did not know people in college. To me, quality of life was surviving high school and going to work. And it just did not feel like it was a place where I would be accepted. Not interested." And she'd continue to see me in the community and bring me back, and say, "Doug, when are you going to come see me? Doug, when are you going to come see me?" And it just never resonated. But, it was hard to keep the lights on. It was hard to keep a roof over my head. But when I looked outside, there was no hope or opportunity outside for me. And that made me come to a reality that I needed to do something. And the hard part for me was going to be trust. So I finally decided to go visit her. So to this day, what I say is a college like Bismarck State is someplace where you will go, where people will believe in you before you're capable of believing in yourself. It's not that I was that student, I am that student.
I mean, we talk all the time about the incredible magic that happens in education. And frankly, I'm a big believer that, especially in the K-12 level, it's never the person that came up with the best way to teach A, B, and C or spent the most time in their garage tinkering to come up with this new way of teaching somebody. It's somebody that takes an interest in an individual. It's a teacher that sees something in a student that they didn't know that was there, provides them with a skill or maybe polishes a skill that they didn't know that they had to totally change the trajectory of life. And when I invite people to reflect on the three teachers that had the most greatest impact on their particular life, their career pathway, themselves as an individual, everybody can pick three. And it's always somebody that took an interest in you and showed you that you could do something you didn't know. And credit to Miss Fletcher and every single teacher in all of education that does that. And we're going to talk about your faculty here a little bit. But I want to talk more on the topic of education in general. So, how has that influenced this experience of growing up in the family that you did, having a father who was a machinist, having him bring home these, these parts that he could show you what he was doing. And then obviously the challenging time of your life with the loss of your parents and then trying to figure out where to go. How has all of that influenced your general philosophy about education as you lead an institution like Bismarck State?
To me, education is empowering. If you really want to look at preparing somebody for life, you need to empower them. And it's not just about degrees, it's about skills, competencies, and knowledges. Two things have got me through life. And I tell people this all the time: it's faith and education, and it's grounded there. You have to develop a skill or a talent that somebody sees value in. And I think that's what's incumbent upon us as educators is to not just think about degrees or outcomes or things of that nature, but are we giving them the skill set that they need to be economically competitive in a global world? The world is a very small place right now. So that's to me what drives all this is how do we prepare these individuals so that they will be empowered against economic downturn, recession, divorce, illness, whatever. How do we make sure these individuals can withstand these challenges so that they can continue on to progress, to move towards high priority, high demand occupations?
You bring up that word faith. First of all, I want to commend you on being comfortable talking about that. A lot of people aren't. And I think it's really, really important. And certainly not just faith, but the power of education, empowering individuals toward doing things that they didn't know they could do, toward seeking career pathways that they didn't know they could seek. All of that is really, really important. And I'm sure in many ways is what's led you to this amazing leadership position that you have now. But you didn't start there, right? And you had your time in community college. And what did you earn an associate degree while you were in community college?
Yes, I remember my first experience with a community college was in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County Community College. And when I went and saw Miss Fletcher, it was one of the things I realized I was not prepared for college. And the last thing I needed was another institution telling me I was not worthy. And what she did is, and I say this frequently, she saw things in me that I could not see. She had the ability to have experience and reference and could see places I could go or things that I could develop, but I could not see them. And what that required for me was trust. And trust was very difficult in the kind of community I grew up in. Three things happen when you grow up the way I do. You let very few people into your inner circle. People who come into your inner circle, you have to be careful because you're either going to get physically hurt, emotionally hurt, or financially hurt. So you're very guarded on that. So it took some time for her to work through that with me. And then all of a sudden, I became intrinsically motivated. I started to believe in myself. Now, once I started to believe in myself, it wasn't that my IQ went up or my intelligence went up. I had an intrinsic belief that I was capable and that people believed in me. Now, my job was now to convey that to others. And that's really how I see my role here in higher education is, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it's not that I was that student. I am that student. So when I look at the world, people will ask me, how do you see the college? Do you see it from a faculty point of view? Do you see it from a student services point of view? Do you see it from an economic point of view? I see it through the same set of scared eyes as that young man that walked through that door. And I talk about threshold opportunities. Every door has a threshold. Some people see that threshold as 4 inches. Some people see that threshold as 4 miles. How do you help that person who doesn't know, doesn't believe, is fearful to step over? So we have to have a person before the door that encourages them, a person at the door that helps them over the threshold, and a person that's there if the person starts to struggle that they can encourage them to stay. We always talk about don't quit. So to me, it's not that I've read about this theory in some of my graduate degrees and so forth. I've lived it. I know the power of education, and I know the power if you put a person in the right situation, they will and can succeed.
And what a great analogy is we think about that threshold, we think about the door, and who among us at some point in our life hasn't had to overcome some fear, whether it was a fear of starting a job, whether it was a fear of what direction are we going to go in education, whether it was being at a crossroads in life and having to pick a direction and not being sure, and having somebody, to your point, on the front of the door to welcome us in, to encourage us, to let us know that this is an opportunity, a pathway that we could have, somebody that helps us across that chasm, whether it is 4 inches or 4 miles or or 400 miles or whatever it is. And so much of it, to your point, comes back to that whole mental paradigm and believing in yourself and knowing that you can do it, and really having somebody else show confidence in you, and then internalizing that confidence. And really, once you have that person on the backside of the door is really that person that helps you say, oh my goodness, that person believes in me. Now I have an obligation to make that belief right. And so whether we're an individual trying to overcome a fear, or even more important in some cases, somebody trying to mentor an individual who's moving through that time in life, setting an expectation for somebody that maybe they didn't know they could take on, or setting the goal maybe higher than they ever thought they could achieve, but then believing in that person and instilling in that person both the trust that you suggest and the obligation they feel to kind of stepping up and being able to overcome that challenge, which is really, really important at education as education continues to evolve. The evolution here at Bismarck State has been just incredible. I know 3 years ago you stepped into this whole world of referring to yourself as a polytechnic institution. Would love to hear your thoughts on what do you mean when you say polytechnic?
When I talk about polytechnic, it's a couple of things. One, it's the integration of multiple technologies, integrated systems. We know that where the world's at now with, the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0 standards. There's no longer separate systems. There's no longer silos. There's integration, right? And it's not local integration. It could be cloud integration, right? You could have systems and processes talking all over the world. And things like AI is only going to accelerate that. So, what a polytechnic institutions is starts to train individuals with hands-on, real experience, working side by side with industry leaders in large flex spaces on projects that they will face in the real world as part of a manufacturing or a production community. Our math students might be helping a company do the ASQ runoffs on a piece of packing. We need 100,000 runoffs. We can do that. Our manufacturing students could be helping students bring in a piece of packing equipment. We have to modify it, renovate it, set it up. Our electrical students could be doing power. Our English comp students could be writing standard operating procedures. It's integrating them into this real world system where there are multiple technologies. It's a hands on learning experience, but it's building that kind of confidence that you're solving problems, not just gathering content or passing courses.
So I know the answer to this question is yes, but I think the question is probably more of a how. How does a polytechnic education prepare a student for the workforce in ways that a kind of traditional education may not?
Integration, experience, not just learning content, but going out and putting it to practice. Many people learn more by fixing something. One of the key things is not just teaching like a person how to run a robotic arm or to run a system, but it's putting in faults. Drop a fault in and have them now troubleshoot. I used to joke about kind of the first test is the smoke test. Plug it in, and if it's smoking, unplug it. So you have a process that you have to go through. You can't learn that just by experiencing a lecture or just by experiencing reading a book or watching a YouTube video or whatever. You need to be involved with real people. Relationships do matter. I mean, if you have a problem in front of you, people that'll be more successful at solving that problem are people who can work together. You take smart people and you put them on a problem. If they can't communicate and work together, a less talented group of people will solve that problem. I jokingly talk about there's two things that stop people from trying things. First one is fear, and the second one is gravity. Fear, I might do this and somebody might laugh, or it might not work, or it might not, somebody. And the other one is gravity. Get up and do it. Try it. Don't wait for permission. Try it. See how it works. Learn something. The more you try, the more you learn.
Absolutely. As you're saying that, I'm reminded of something again that our producer says quite frequently. And she said, the older generation will look at a button and say, I wonder what happens if I touch that button. And then the younger generation will say, let's touch that button and see what happens. And that's really what polytechnic and kinesthetic learning is all about, is it's exploration. It's understanding what happens if you touch the button by just touching the button and seeing if smoke comes out, then, touch the button again or unplug it, to your point. As we were talking about this importance of troubleshooting, I always joke in my many years in manufacturing that early on in some of our plants, troubleshooting was the idea of just replacing parts on the line until it started working again. And it's like, No, that's not troubleshooting. Troubleshooting is understanding a scientific method, understanding a process, testing that process, cutting the problem in half, cutting it in half again, narrowing it down to one or two or three root causes, figuring out what those are. And just to kind of take that back to the industrial benefit, now we're at a point where, if I had a production line that was down for 4 hours while somebody tried to putz around and figure out how to get it back up and running, or I have a skilled technician that learned at a place like Bismarck State that understands troubleshooting, that understands the science behind it, and can solve that problem in 15 minutes. All of a sudden, all of that cash is flowing to the bottom line. My machine is up and running again. I can get that technician off working on something else. And that's really the benefit of the kind of education that we're talking about. I couldn't agree with you more. The good news is that as great as you're doing this now in the facility that you are in and I are in, we're recording this actually on location at Bismarck State. It's 110,000 square feet and soon to become a lot bigger, as I understand it. So, talk about this. I thought it was $47 million. You corrected me earlier and said it's even more than that. This huge investment that you're making. You got to tell us about that.
I will get to your point about the new building, but I also want to share what does the new building rest on? It's not brick and mortar. It rests on what we refer to as BILT teams, business and industry leadership teams. We do not follow the practice of advisory councils. Advisory councils to me are the kind of the wrong approach. Advisory councils usually end up with a faculty member who has relationships with the industry. They used to work in the industry. They invite the industry in a couple times a year, give them an update of what they're doing. Should I buy a blue welder? Should I buy a red welder? They talk about it, give them lunch, and then I'll see you in 6 months. A business and industry leadership team, a BILT team, is focused on the idea that a business leader or someone, a high value stakeholder, identifies a problem or an opportunity. They bring the problem or opportunity to us. We kind of go through like a DACM process and we try to help refine what is the opportunity because it's not always problems. Sometimes it's more opportunity. And then what we do is we work through that process and then we ask them, who are the two or three other people we need to have at this table? And they bring those two or three people into the conversation. And we go a deeper dive on what it is. And then we open it up again and say, who do you want on this business? Oh, we need to have somebody from banking. Oh, we never thought about that. Or maybe we need to have somebody from criminal justice. We never thought about that. And they form it, they run it, we staff it. We have 11 BILT teams here at Bismarck State College because it's not the brick and mortar. It's the philosophy, it's the culture, it's the attitude, it's the perception of what's going on in that building. But it will be about 88,000 square feet. It has two very large flex labs. It has breakout rooms. We're connecting it to our National Center of Excellence, which we're sitting in right now. So the two buildings will be connected by a walkway. So we don't have to repeat the investment into the labs that you've seen here and the investments we've seen here. It's about integration. The whole building is built around hands-on and it's built around industry's voice. It will look more like a modern manufacturing facility than it will look like any type of school.
Absolutely amazing. So, two parts to that answer, and I want to reflect on the first part of it. I've served on a lot of advisory boards for technical and community colleges, and some are better than others. And frankly, I've been on some that have been pretty solid and pretty good. But what you just said is something that I have lived the wrong side of in some cases firsthand, which is the wrong way to do an advisory board. Every community college, every technical college talks about how they're advised by business and industry. But what you've done here is really, really unique. And I think it does two things. It empowers your industrial employers to feel like they have a say in what's going on, then it's not just a rubber stamp. And also, we talked earlier about setting an expectation for somebody and creating an obligation. When that's your culture, that puts a pretty significant obligation on the part of your industrial employers to turn around and say, all right, if the institution is entrusting us to bring great ideas and we're entrusting them to produce our workforce, we better bring great ideas. Is that what you're hearing from your employers?
Perfect example what you're talking about. I was invited down to our foundation. We had a business leader in town, good sized business, was getting ready to wind down and wanted to do something for the college. And they came to the college saying, I want to do scholarships. But I could tell when I sat down and meet with him and his wife were like, well, we'd like to do a scholarship, but you could see they weren't passionate. So I said to him, I said, so what do you want to do? And he reflected for a moment. He said, well, if I could change anything, he says, in my business, I mean, I wish we had a better way of developing heavy equipment operators. He says, you want to Is that where your passion's at? Well, I'd really like to do something about tackling that. So I said, okay. So I said, well, why don't we get together and talk? So I walked him through that BILT team process. He didn't know we were going through that process, but I was extracting for him what he wanted to do. And it got this passion, and we got down to the goal. I'm a big advocate of the four disciplines of execution. Every goal has to be expressed in the term of X to Y by when. If you can't express it in an X to Y by when, it's not a goal. So we got down, what is it that you want? I would like to have a heavy equipment operator program available to the, okay, we'll make that happen. So we started talking. Next thing he says, oh, I'll get this person to come to the meeting. I'll get this person to come to the meeting. We can do donations, heavy equipment to your foundation. We can get a tax write-off. We need land. Oh, we need land. Who can we get land from to make a sandbox to do this? And they took it over. And in less than a year, we have a fully operational, credit-based, heavy equipment operator program because industry drove it. Too often, education, in my opinion, I'm guilty of it. I've been in business for over 35 years, so I believe I have the right to say these things. We have a tendency when we start talking to business leaders, we say, tell me your problem. They define their problem. And I say, here's your solution. They can help us find the solution. It's a process of working them through that. Now they got skin in the game. Our industry partnerships are making huge investments. We can leverage their buying power. There's an easy one, right? They buy millions and millions of dollars of supplies. Well, go to your vendors and extend to your vendors. Tell them, offer BSC the same price points. They can also bring their personnel in. We have individuals here where companies have actually paying their salary, and the person is spending their 40-hour week here at BSC. That's the power of partnerships.
Absolutely. We have a saying that I use, if you ask for money, you'll get advice. And if you ask for advice, you'll get money. And that is kind of encapsulates what you just talked about, which is, rather than just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. Do you want to fund it? It's listening to an employer. It's having them come up with an idea that's, maybe even more creative and bigger than what you would have come up with on your own. And then implementing that idea and then finding a way to get to, as you put it, from X to Y by when. And then let's face it, there's a lot, and I was one of them. And I was an industrial employer that knew industry backwards and forwards. I didn't know anything about education. It's not that one's easier or harder, but the way you get things done in public policy and education differs from, the way you get it done in industry when you're the person that just makes a decision on your own and can just implement it on your own. And so it's that two-way street of informing the industrial employer about how education works. But then once you've got that going, to be able to implement a program like that in something as quickly as 12 months, really, really impressive.
It's an ROI. We have to shift the conversation that education is a public expense
Yep.
to education is an economic investment. When you go to the table with commerce and agriculture or energy or all the agencies, and you're there as a value proposition, you want to bring somebody into this community, a business attraction. Many companies right now have capital. Capital is not the hard part of the equation. They're all worried about talent. Who is the human capital supply chain? You have a disruption. We spend so much money on continuity of operations for IT, finance, supply chain, but one of the biggest variables in every business is human capital. And you ask a CEO, what is your continuity of operations for human capital? Silent. So we need to show how education becomes that economic investment into that development of talent. We need to develop a unified workforce development system for the state of North Dakota. That is a value proposition. Legislators will fund investments. They don't like to fund expenses.
Absolutely. I was just having a conversation with one of your public policy leaders earlier today, and we were having exactly that conversation when I did a bunch of greenfield expansions with manufacturing companies where we were putting in brand new plants in different regions. And it used to be, number one was proximity to customers and suppliers. Number two was availability of usually state or local incentives. And number three was workforce. And that is 100% flipped in the last 15 years. I mean, companies are expanding where they know they'll have access to a qualified workforce and where they know they'll have access to an institution and a community that's willing to continue to invest in education in the areas where we're producing individuals who are job ready for the kinds of jobs that are existing now and in the future. And it's just absolutely huge. And the truth of the matter is that as we see private employers investing in these kind of projects, frankly, for most of them, that what the money they're investing is a rounding error, right? I mean, it's not significant amounts of their annual operating budget or their annual capital budget, but it means a huge difference in terms of being able to create a catalyst for producing skilled talent. So many creative ways to do that. So many creative ways I'm seeing here at Bismarck State. One of the things that I know is really creative, especially for traditionally a 2-year institution, is you're now offering 4-year degrees in applied science. And that is something that we're going to talk about a little bit here, both in terms of why and the opportunities, and also maybe some of the headwinds and challenges that you run into. But tell us a little bit about what students are starting to learn now in these second 2 years of these degrees that maybe they weren't learning before.
The key is, I think, we look at it from a career pathway point of view. Not only have we invested in bachelors of applied science, we're also looking at other types of degrees, but probably our massive amount of our work was in stackable credentials. How do you take 16 credits in North Dakota because it's financially aidable? And how do you take three 16 credit certificates, which totals up to 48 credits? You put your 15 to 17 credits of general education on top of it. You got an associate degree in applied science or applied technology at 60 to 63 credits. You leverage two more certificates on top of that, which is another 48 credits. You finish off rounding the general education, and you have a bachelor's degree in applied science. So to me, it's the Rubrik's Cube. We talk about it here that a person can spin that Rubrik's Cube. Maybe they want mechatronics 1, mechatronics 2, mechatronics 3, get your gen eds, get your associate degree. Maybe they only want mechatronics 1. Maybe they want mechatronics 1, welding 1, and supervisory management. They can spin that Rubrik's Cube any way they want to put together the certificates they are looking for that aligns with their career path. The average age of a Bismarck State student is 25 plus years of age. She's becoming more female. She may be a mom. She may be a single mom. She's looking for a better quality of life for her and her family, and that's what she's going to school for. Same thing with the male student, about 50-50. Maybe a dad, maybe a single dad, working full-time, going to school part-time, looking for a better quality of life. That's the value proposition. That's why we're seeing some of the enrollment growth we're seeing at Bismarck State College. This spring, we're up 8.3% plus, which is up over 10% the previous year, which was up over 5.5%. In addition to all that, as a business leader, I hope you would appreciate this. We have implemented a model called unit cost. Basically, so what we do is we can measure every unit of instructional delivery. So we've had 3 consecutive years of declining unit costs, which means that we're offering the same number or more credits less than what we did 3 years ago. So we were able to take that revenue. So the revenue that we are able to generate through unit cost savings, as well as tuition increases, we take that money, we go to our business leaders, and recently we've created the Office of Workforce and Economic Development. It's been self-funded through basically red tape reduction and revenue growth. So it's a mindset that we have to develop there. And I think that's what the next 2 years is. You don't have to sit and wait 4 or 5 years to get your credential. You come and get a quick 16 credit certificate, go out, go to work. Your employer is going to pay for you to go back to school. You're reducing debt. You're reducing time to workforce. You're solving a workforce problem, speed to market. We address all those things. And if you really want to see the power of that, extend it down into K to 12. And you start having individuals come out of K to 12 graduating with certificates, graduating with associate degrees, industry recognized credentials, employment ready. And that's the power of economic and workforce development.
You know, I met Doug, a young lady. Her name was Brianna. She was a student at a rural high school in Western Wisconsin. She had just graduated from high school. She had 3 credits from the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. She graduated from high school in 3 years. She went to a program that was funded by Ashley Furniture Industries, which is the largest employer in the town that she grew up in. She worked 2 jobs while she was graduating from high school in 3 years. And one of those 2 jobs was as a junior automation technician at Ashley Furniture, using the skills that she had learned in the program funded by Ashley Furniture around mechatronics. In what would have been her senior year, living at home, started as a student at the University of Wisconsin Stout, and was able to take tons of credits from her high school journey into a degree program at Stout. Those are the stories I just love. And we talk about creating on-ramps and off-ramps. We talk about all these non-traditional learners. We talk about a 25-year-old single mother with most of her life ahead of her that has this aspiration of better job, a better pay, of, creating a better lifestyle for our kids. And now we create these on and off ramps where it's not a 4-year sentence or 5-year sentence toward a degree necessarily, but it's all these different opportunities to get in and out of the degree program. It sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yes, and throw into that competency-based education. I still struggle with the idea that we have an agricultural-based education system, 2 semesters a year, when we have a 21st century economy. If you have a 25-year-old who has a lot of experience, say they were in the military and they were a medic, why am I going to put them through a full course of medical terminology? Let's look at competency-based education, credit for prior learning, document that they can get that, and then give them a course that they can basically, maybe I can complete this course in 4 weeks. Maybe I got to complete this course in 14 weeks. Support the learner, give them many options. Most people do not drop out of higher education because of cognitive issues. They drop out because of what I call affective domain issues. Life gets in the way. It'll eventually show up as a math score. Oh, well, they dropped out because they dropped their math class. That's not the reason why they dropped. They dropped because of transportation. Our populations are so vulnerable. You cannot sit on the sidelines for 4 or 5 years. Their lives are not predictable for 4 or 5 months. So, how do we shorten that? And I think competency based education is deeply rooted in technical education and working with the private sector.
And as we turn our sights to something like competency based education and say, we are going to make this as efficient as possible for you. Yes, you have to do the learning. Yes, you have to do the work. Yes, you have to have the competency when you're done. But how you get there, and there's myriad ways to get there. We're going to work with you through that whole process, whether it's for through a certificate or a certification, an associate degree, or in this case, a bachelor's degree. Do you see these 4-year degrees being more and more a part of what you're doing here at Bismarck State?
Yes, but like I said, it'll be a career path. It'll be over time. They will pick it up and they will build it over time. 70% of the jobs in the future are not going to require a baccalaureate degree. Doesn't mean we're going to stop offering baccalaureate degrees, but 70% of the jobs that are out there are basically going to require some type of post high school credential or industry recognized credentials. And then students and adults are going to wrap other things around there. If they want to get into management or they want to get a leadership, they might put a master's or whatever on top of that. But it's really going to be focused on that element of individuals getting the skill sets that they need. The states that figure out how to create this public private partnership where the skills, competencies, and knowledges that are needed for the private sector with partnerships from industry will become an economic differentiator that will be used to attract economic value to that region. The state that can figure that out and the people who figure that out will have an economic differentiator that will attract businesses from all over the world.
We spend a lot of time studying the different state models and who's innovating and who isn't. This is a state that's figuring it out. Do you feel the same way? I mean, is the future pretty bright in terms of what's happening, not just here, but statewide?
That's why I'm here. I could have stayed where I was at. I mean, this is my third presidency. I did not come to North Dakota to be a president. I came here because I see the opportunity. Ultimately, my goal is to create North Dakota's Polytechnic University. We are in the capital city. We have the second largest community in the state. There's no reason why we should not have a publicly funded polytechnic university that can work side by side with policy leaders, businesses, economic development, commerce, and have this place where it all unites together, like the 100 and some 10,000 and the 88,000 square foot facility that will be an economic generator, and it builds community development, workforce development, and economic development. Building sustainable communities. You have to have all three of those. You want to have strong communities, you need to have strong workforce development. You want to have strong workforce development, you need to have a strong economic development strategy. You want to have a strong economic development strategy, you need to have communities where people want to live, grow, and invest in businesses. That interlocking of those three terms in a Venn diagram is the economic power that I think education, the private sector, and policy leaders need to leverage so that we can make sure that the United States remains great.
Couldn't agree more. It sounds so simple, but it seems so complicated. What kind of challenges do you run into when you're trying to innovate like?
You run into a lot of resistance. Jokingly, what's the 7 last words of any organization? We've always done it that way. So the idea is you're overcoming resistance, right? You're overcoming security. We've always done it that way. If it works, don't fix it. Define works, right? If you're not innovating, if you're not trying to figure out what the future is, you will be consumed by the headwinds that are coming in the future. And we have to be responsive. Communities depend on it, our citizens depend on it, and it's just the right thing to do.
Significant headwinds. We talk about things like the enrollment cliff, like the fact that higher education in general is going to be recruiting from a smaller group of students, and it's got nothing to do with anything other than demographics in most cases, and I guess also the changing attitudes toward higher education, some of which are driving good change, and some of which are certainly creating some challenges for institutions of higher education. What do you hear in terms of attracting students, retaining students, creating the right pathways for them? What are your students telling you about their experience here at Bismarck State, not just now, but in terms of how you're planning to innovate going forward?
They see the value. They're starting to look at the value proposition. Parents are looking at the value propositions. I think this generation right now is coming from a group of parents who made big investments into higher education, and they're paying off those loans for years and years and years, and they're starting to question the value. But they're also starting to realize you walk into a business or an opportunity nowadays, that business needs an immediate return on you. They don't have like the old days of Westinghouse where you can go and be in a Westinghouse management program for 5 years and get developed. They need you to come to make an immediate return. That's what they're looking for. And the students are starting to see that. That's why our enrollments are growing. It's our polytechnic mission. It's our attitude. It's from the day you walk into the door to the day you walk out, how you're treated, how you're felt, the people you see, the private sector around us. This is not your traditional college environment. It is a hybrid of that world that the student is going to find themselves in.
And just walking around this facility and seeing the types of technology, the simulators, you've got just incredible supply chain logistics training programs, all kinds of automation here. I mean, when you talk about that energy, when you talk about it not feeling like a typical college, from the technology, the dedication of your faculty, we're seeing the benefits, we're seeing the fruits of that labor. So just an incredible day that we've had here, Doug. And we've got time for one last question. And we're going to begin where we started, right? So we started talking about your childhood, really unique upbringing, growing up in Pittsburgh, the challenges that you faced with the passing of your parents at an incredibly early age. And now here you're doing all this amazing stuff at Bismarck State. It's clear to our audience that you've got a level of vision and energy around you that we don't often see in leadership at the community and technical college level. But going all the way back to being maybe that 15-year-old kid, you're a sophomore in high school, you're growing up in steel country. And if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to that 15-year-old Doug, what would that be?
You have to believe in yourself. Don't let people define who you are. Define yourself. And if you're around people that are not lifting you up, find new people.
Hmm, that's beautiful. Absolutely. So you've got to believe in yourself. Don't let somebody else define who you are. And most important, we're all a product of the environment that we're in. We're all a product of the people that we surround ourselves with. You're making a huge, huge difference. And I want to thank you for sharing that story with us here on the Tech Ed Podcast. Dr. Doug Jensen, the president of Bismarck State. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Well, what a great message this week from Doug Jensen, president of Bismarck State College, on the importance of having people around us who believe in us. That was an incredibly inspirational message for me, particularly inspirational when we think also about how we make learning and advancing through our careers that much more efficient. We talked all about competency-based learning, the importance of knowing that it isn't necessarily the piece of paper that you hold in your hands. It's what you are able to do when you get to the workforce or wherever you go after you finish your educational journey. And we really never finish our educational journey as we continue lifelong learning. And I know that was a topic that resonated with our audience too today during our time with Doug Jensen, president of Bismarck State College. We know there are going to be all kinds of great links ready for you in the show notes. So please check those out. We have awesome show notes every single week. And so you will find those at techedpodcast.com/Jensen. That's techedpodcast.com/JENSEN. Be sure when you're out on social media to come find us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, wherever you consume your social media. We will be there ready to share the best practices in technical education, those best practices we talk about every single week here on the Tech Ed Podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. Until next week, I am Matt Kirkner, your host.